Hello everyone, my name is Peyton, and welcome to the very first review on the channel. Now, with it being the first of its kind, I had a bit of trouble deciding what to review, as on the one hand, I want to review something that would be interesting to talk about, as well as to be a sort of proof of concept for all reviews afterwards. But on the other hand, I'm still learning how to even create videos as I'm writing this, so I don't want to do something that will be overly complex, both when it comes to writing and editing. So, I thought I would start off by reviewing a piece of paleomedia like a documentary, as that shouldn't be too difficult to make a review on. But which one? There are so many great dinosaur documentaries out there that it's pretty difficult to pick one to review. Do I do a classic, like something from the Walking With series, or something more recent, like Netflix's Life on Our Planet, which I did almost pick? However, I thought of a better idea. Rather than covering something I've seen before, I should review something that I have never seen, to prepare me for any future time where I might not know anything about what I'm reviewing. After all, it would be easy for me to write a college thesis-length review on why, despite its inaccuracies, Walking with Dinosaurs is still the greatest dinosaur documentary in existence, but it's a lot harder to talk about something I have little connection to. That's when I remembered about a relatively popular dinosaur documentary that for some reason I had yet to watch. That documentary was When Dinosaurs Roamed America. I honestly don't know why I never watched this until making this review. After all, I consumed every other piece of paleomedia I ever heard of as a kid. I don't know, maybe as a Canadian with ample access to the Walking With series, I didn't have any interest in what looked like a cheap American knockoff. Which, after finally watching after all this time, I can't say I was wrong in that assumption. Now, don't get me wrong, it was a fine enough watch, but it just lacked something. From the visuals to the pacing, it just really did feel like it had been rushed out to catch the trend of dinosaur documentaries being made after the success of Walking with Dinosaurs. But on the other hand, it also does have some really novel concepts for the time, with some things I actually thought were handled better than in Walking with Dinosaurs. As someone with no nostalgic tie to this film, and someone who is truly fascinated by prehistory, I believe I am the perfect person to look back at this documentary and give it a fair assessment. Let's see how this documentary has stood the test of time, and review When Dinosaurs Roamed America. Before we start, there's already a problem I see with this before it even begins, and that's the runtime. This documentary is having to cram the entire Mesozoic era into an hour and a half. For context, that's half the runtime of Walking with Dinosaurs. Because of this, we hardly get to spend any time in any location, with most segments being under 15 minutes long, and with the longest segment, the late Cretaceous 65 million years ago, because of course that's the one that gets the most spotlight, being just over 20 minutes. This basically kills any possibility of having the storytelling or impact of other paleomedia like Walking with Dinosaurs. And I know what you're thinking, it's supposed to be educational, it doesn't need a story. But if I wanted to watch a dinosaur documentary to just be given the facts, I'd watch something like National Geographic's Dinosaur Hunters. Why of all the documentaries I could have chose did I pick that one? Where it's mostly paleontologists unearthing fossils and theorizing about how these animals might have lived. Whereas with these sorts of media, where they try and replicate real-life nature documentaries, it adds an additional layer of visual storytelling. You're able to get a much better view of how these animals survived in their environments, and the relationships between each species in the ecosystem, which I personally think is lost here because we never spend enough time in any given location. Even when the Walking With series was given a similar runtime to this film in Walking With Monsters, it still succeeded in giving us smaller stories that showed what life was like in each period. Plus, it probably helped that there were, and still are, very few other documentaries that cover the Paleozoic, meaning there aren't many other options if you want a nature documentary focused around this period of history, whereas there are plenty of other options if you want to explore the Mesozoic, so why watch one of the ones that accomplishes what it sets out to do the least? I don't know, maybe my bias towards the Paleozoic is showing, but in any case, I saw it worth mentioning. Okay, now onto the actual documentary. I would also like to apologize in advance that the footage will probably be of terrible quality. I originally watched this on Dailymotion, as it tends to have higher quality resolution compared to YouTube. However, I was bombarded with so many commercials while watching this that recording footage is going to be hell if I don't use the YouTube port of this film. So, sorry that everything is in such poor quality. Hopefully this won't be a common thing for these reviews going forward. So we open on an intro sequence similar to other documentaries where we get brief glimpses of what's to come.
Journey back to a time when the world was a jungle primeval.
No, not that primeval, unfortunately. Actually, stay tuned, as that might be one of the next things I review. Also, wait, John Goodman's narrating this?
I'm like a fat ballerina who takes scalps and slits throats.
Actually, his narration is really good, and thankfully he doesn't seem to have any, let's say, strange mannerisms like some other narrators.
I gotta give him credit for trying.
After a brief look at 2001 New York, we are thrust back to the Permian mass extinction. Wow, just over 3 minutes in and we already have problems. An asteroid did not cause the Permian mass extinction. It was caused by mass global warming and increased volcanism, most notably in the Siberian traps. This led to the ozone layer beginning to break down, alongside increased acidity and decreased oxygen in the ocean. I have no clue where they thought of this. What, did they only research the KPG mass extinction and just assumed all mass extinctions were caused by space rocks? The first segment takes place in New York 220 million years ago, in the late Triassic. We are introduced to our first dinosaur, which, as expected, is Coelophysis. Well, really it shouldn't be expected, judging that Coelophysis shouldn't evolve for another 5 million years. Maybe this really is connected to primeval. The design is alright, looking like your average depiction of the creature. The only real issues are, as expected with most theropods from this era of paleomedia, that it has pronated hands. For those unaware, dinosaurs in a lot of media are depicted with their palms facing backwards or at the ground, which was not possible without breaking their wrists, and should instead have their palms facing each other. Every theropod in this show switches whether or not they have pronated wrists or not to a frustrating degree, and almost every species in this show suffers from shrink wrapping, so I might as well bring it up now so I don't have to be repetitive. It also is very possible Coelophysis may have had feathers, but this is still debated, so as for now, no points off. The Coelophysis goes to get a drink of water from the watering hole, and oh wow, that's real bad CGI on the Phytosaur. Okay, I don't want to harp on the CGI much in this video, as especially by the second half I tended not to notice it, but man, it took some getting used to. Despite the model looking subpar quality-wise, the Rudiodon is actually pretty accurate. I mean, yeah, it's pretty hard to screw up what's essentially a crocodile, but nonetheless, it's appreciated. No, not Rex! Wow, that's 3 primeval references already, and it probably won't be the last. Actually, it's an Icarosaurus, which John Goodman calls...
Icarosaurus is the first reptile to learn how to glide.
Which is just wrong. Ironically enough, I think the first gliding reptile that we know of was actually Coelurosauravus. Afterwards, the Coelophysis disturbs a Traversodon. The model looks fine, but Traversodon is known from South America, not North America. Though with how little we see it, I honestly wonder if it's only here because Walking with Dinosaurs had a Cynodon, meaning this one also has to have one. We cut to a riverbank with some Rudiodon chilling, and yo, wait, Desmetasuchus is in this?
Demastasuchus is a docile plant eater.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's apparently Demastasuchus. You know what, I'll give John Goodman credit, this is the only species he mispronounces. Either way, the model looks great. Desmetasuchus was always one of those creatures who I'd always see in books but had zero media appearances, so it's nice seeing them in this. The Desmetasuchus gets into some extremely short scuffles with a Rudiodon and a Coelophysis before the Coelophysis goes to find easier prey.
This locust can usually fly its way out of trouble.
Oh god, not more locusts! Wait, there are anatomy sections in this? Immersion? What's that? Maybe I was wrong. This film didn't rip off the Walking With series. The Walking With series ripped off this. Though at least in Walking With Monsters, we had realistic-looking scenes of the creatures' inner workings instead of sending them to a black void.
Looks like you're going to the Shadow Realm, Jimbo. Oh, it's just down the street, next to the Chick-fil-A.
Then they show us the Triassic extinction event, which is another fricking asteroid. I think my theory is starting to have merit. It is believed the Triassic extinction event was caused by volcanic eruptions in the Central Atlantic Magnetic Province, which, in similar but far less devastating conditions than the Great Dying, caused global warming and ocean acidification. Whoa, what the hell is going on? Wait, there are also live-action segments as well? I'm now starting to see how this got to an hour-and-a-half runtime. These are a little less jarring than the anatomy sections, as they tend to cover topics that couldn't be said well in the nature documentary format, but they're not really that important to cover for this review. Again, I don't hate these sorts of things in other documentaries, but I personally find that it takes away from the immersion that we are actually going back in time to observe these creatures. Though the bad CGI kind of already makes keeping any immersion difficult. We're now in early Jurassic Pennsylvania, 200 million years ago, where we meet a pack of Syntarsis. This is a time in prehistory that is rarely covered in paleomedia, so I'm actually excited to see what happens.
They're about the same size as their forerunners in the Triassic.
Yeah, that might be because you just took your Coelophysis model and added crests. Of all the things you rip off from the Walking With series, you chose that. Then again, Syntarsis was once thought to be synonymous with Coelophysis, so maybe it wasn't such a bad idea reusing the model, as it results in a pretty accurate Syntarsis, with the only problems being the same inaccuracies as Coelophysis. The Syntarsis are hunting a Ankylosaurus. The model looks pretty good. I don't notice anything wrong outside of it being a little oversized, as Syntarsis should be around the same size if not larger, but it definitely isn't the worst case of that in this documentary. Hey, I've seen enough of the aisle to recognize that noise, and sure enough, it's Dilophosaurus. I'm so glad to see a piece of media depicting Dilo as a large top predator, rather than a small, venom-spitting gremlin. I love Jurassic Park as much as the next guy, but the damage it has caused to Dilo's image in the eyes of the general public needs to be known, and thankfully this documentary delivers. The crest should be larger and rounder, and it's possibly had feathers, but otherwise it's a beautiful model. Wait, did they just reverse the footage? Holy hell, they did! Also, why?
In the future, carnivores will have 3 fingers instead of 4. Their heads will grow larger, their bodies more massive, and the crest will disappear.
No. Many other theropod dinosaurs would still have 4 fingers, and many would still have crests. Ignoring other basal theropods like Ceratosaurus, Abelisaurs would still have 4 fingers, as well as many of them had striking headgear. And many Carcharodontosaurs, like Allosaurus, also had small crests. What was the point in this line? It was dated even back when the documentary came out. We then jump to late Jurassic Utah, 150 million years ago. We are introduced to Camarasaurus, Stegosaurus, and Dryosaurus, who I'm going to try and rapid fire through as they're all pretty good. Camarasaurus looks pretty great, and I'm glad it lacks the elephantine feet given to most sauropods, plus it's just one of my personal favorites. Stego also looks good. The neck is surprisingly a good length, which is uncommon when this documentary came out. Finally, Dryo looks pretty good. It may have had feathers, but that's in debate, and in any case, it's still a good model regardless. After over 25 minutes into this documentary, we finally see some dinosaur behavior other than eating and fighting. Sure, it's only a Stegosaurus and some Dryos digging for water like modern elephants, but god damn it, it's something. Yo, my boy Ceratosaurus has finally made his debut. Cerato is one of those species that isn't widely known outside the paleo community, but if you've watched enough paleo media, the general audience will have probably seen it at least once. And as one of my favorite theropods, and dinosaurs in general, I'm really glad that they included them. I mean, usually whenever Cerrato is thrown in a documentary, it's only to be in Allosaurus's punching bag, but that won't happen here, right? Right? But in any case, the model is excellent. One of the best looking Ceratosaurus designs I've seen in a documentary, though again, there isn't much competition. The only thing worth mentioning is that John Goodman calls it the last of its kind, which isn't accurate, as we know of other ceratosaurs from the Cretaceous like Geniodectes. The Ceratosaurus attacks the Dryosaur family and is able to bring down one of the juveniles. In one shot, we see a couple of rhamphorhynchoid pterosaurs. They're possibly Comodactylus, as that's the only pterosaur that really fits the time, place, and overall appearance. It looks good, though it's hard to tell if it had any pycnofibers or not with how little we see them. Hey, did you know you waste over 200 hours a year doing dishes? Because I've had it engraved into my head with how many dish soap commercials I've had to watch on Daily Motion. Note to self, either find the DVD or sit through the terrible YouTube resolution for future reviews. No, Ceratosaurus, you shouldn't go up against two stegos. You're going to get yourself... And they're dead. Or at least they should be. And I'm not just saying that because they were just walloped by 3-foot-long thagomizers. Look at the Cerato's neck. You should probably see a chiropractor about that. We now see Apatosaurus, which is definitely a classic look for the behemoth, though now inaccurate. We now know that diplodocids like Apatosaurus held their neck at a more vertical angle rather than horizontal, but otherwise the model is pretty good.
This is Dino of the Flintstones, in the flesh.
Holy hell! John Goodman just referenced the Flintstones! Next we see Allosaurus, and oh god, that's an ugly design. Which it tries to attack a juvenile Apatosaurus similar to the scene in Walking with Dinosaurs, but the mother stops it before it can commit plagiarism. The design, while not looking great visually, is a fine enough Allo design, only suffering from the usual flaws of this show's creatures and just having a bad case of the ugly. It looks like an unused Operation Genesis model. Why am I not surprised? We now travel to mid-Cretaceous New Mexico, 90 million years ago, where we are introduced to another personal favorite of mine, Zuniceratops. The model looks great, I don't really have any complaints about it, extra points for not giving it elephantine feet like most ceratopsid depictions. Now we get my biggest praise towards this film, that being, this was one of, if not the first documentaries to depict fully feathered dinosaurs. Sure, they don't depict the right kind of feathers on the dromaeosaurs, but for 2001, this was impressive, especially when you remember that depicting feathered dinosaurs is something the Walking With series struggled with through its entire original run. Speaking of the dromaeosaurs, we see a pack of them feeding on a Zuniceratops. The design looks great for the time, but it's honestly hard to tell what species it's supposed to be from it alone. Here, I'll just look up what dromaeosaurs are known from this location. Oh, there are no dromaeosaurs known from New Mexico, or at least none from 90 million years ago. Did they just make up a dromaeosaur just to have a segment focused on raptors? I guess this technically makes it the least accurate creature in the show, judging by the fact it literally doesn't exist.
A dromaeosaur, or raptor, is the smartest, quickest, and most dangerous dinosaur alive.
Smartest dinosaurs, eh? We'll see about that. A solo dromaeosaur runs into a Nothoronychus.
No other creature in the world looks like a half-plucked turkey and walks like a pot-bellied bear.
You can say that again, John. He's so tubby, I love him. Also, the design in general is great. Unlike the dromaeosaurs, the downy, hair-like feathers on the Nothoronychus are actually accurate, with us having fossil evidence of other therizinosaurs having these kind of feathers. It could maybe use a little more feathers in general, but otherwise everything else about the design is good as well.
I like your cut, G.
Later on, we see the pack of dromaeosaurs attempt to hunt the herd of Zuniceratops. We see the raptors use their sickle claws to slash into one of their sides, which again is inaccurate. The claws of dromaeosaurs do not have the force to slash through flesh. Instead, they use their claws to latch on to or pin down their prey, as they mutilate them with their jaws. This is called raptor prey restraint, and is also seen today in modern birds of prey. Afterwards, we get a proper introduction to the adorable coelurosaurs we briefly saw earlier, which are actually named Susci-tyrannus. They should be bigger and look more like other tyrannosaurids, but they almost make up for it in the cute factor alone. Also, more feathered dinosaurs. Yay! But then we get probably one of the dumbest scenes I've ever seen in any documentary that wasn't Jurassic Fight Club. So, the dromaeosaurs bring down the old bull Zuniceratops. However, lightning strikes a tree and causes a forest fire, and while all the other dinosaurs flee in terror, John Goodman says,
Some creatures ignore the peril. When it comes to food, danger has no meaning for the raptors.
Yeah, what did John say about them again?
The smartest, quickest, and most dangerous dinosaur alive.
Ah yes, so smart. No, not Tubby Boy.
The raptors will stay small, agile, and quick. But they'll get smarter.
Yeah, maybe they'll become smart enough to not set themselves on fire! We now travel to the last stop in this documentary, that being Late Cretaceous, South Dakota, 65 million years ago. Kind of a weird time to go, judging by the fact that all the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago. Who am I kidding? Even most paleomedia today is getting that fact wrong. We see a herd of Triceratops and Ornithomimus grazing as a Quetzalcoatlus flies overhead. The Triceratops looks alright. Like Zuniceratops, I appreciate the lack of elephantine feet, and the presence of small osteoderm-like scales along the back is accurate. However, the juveniles are just smaller versions of the adults, rather than having the correct-looking skull, and the adults are depicted with epoccipitals along the rim of the frill, which while present on juvenile Triceratops, they aren't present on the adults. The Ornithomimus looks fine. It doesn't have nearly enough feathers, but we don't really see much of it, so it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. The Quetzalcoatlus looks alright, easily styling over the pathetic excuse for a Quetz in Walking with Dinosaurs. Similar to Comodactylus, it's hard to tell whether or not it has pycnofibers, but I'm giving it extra credit for actually depicting it scavenging, as most depictions of Quetz before and after this depicted it still as a piscivore. We also see Edmontosaurus, named Anatotitan like in Walking with Dinosaurs. That name, however, is outdated, and what was once Anatotitan is now Edmontosaurus annectens. Other than that, the only thing wrong with it is that it's seemingly too small. Edmontosaurus should be one of, if not the largest animal in this ecosystem, but as we'll see later, it's definitely undersized. Another fun fact, did you know there's now a purple M&M? Sorry, the dish soap ads have now been replaced with M&Ms, and unfortunately it isn't this one. We're then introduced to the one and only...
I'm a motherfucking T-Rex! I'm a motherfucking T-Rex!
And man, this design is actually really good. Even as someone with a soft spot for the one in Walking with Dinosaurs, I will admit, it is a little hideous. Thankfully, this design has none of those problems. The design is a little slim, especially compared to the Chonkmeisters of modern depictions, but for the time, this is excellent. The biggest problem is that they depict it hunting in the classic juveniles chase the prey towards the adult strategy, which is generally believed to be outdated. Juvenile rexes and adults filled different roles in the ecosystem and hunted different animals as to not compete with each other. We see this juvenile rex try and take on the trike herd. I don't know why, you're built to hunt things like Ornithomimus and Pachycephalosaurus, not adult Triceratops. Wait, is it a juvenile? John said it was, but compared to the trikes, it looks huge. Anyways, unsurprisingly, the trikes fend off the Rex, which is a nice change from the normal routine of Rex easily killing everything with the exception of Ankylosaurus, which actually doesn't make an appearance in this documentary, which is surprising.
At a mere 200 pounds, Quetzalcoatlus is hamburger for this youngster.
Prehistoric Planet would like a word. Oh god, why do I sense upcoming hadrosaur hate crimes? So we get the previously mentioned inaccurate hunting scene. And is it just me, or are the Rexes upscaled in certain scenes? Like, first the juvenile looked huge compared to the Triceratops and Quetzalcoatlus, and now the adult towers over the Edmontosaurus. You could argue it was a juvenile, in which case I'd let it slide. But if not, then this is definitely another one for the list of pieces of paleomedia that misrepresent hadrosaurs as defenseless meat bags. After the Tyrannosaurus family are finished murdering the innocent, we get to see this documentary's interpretation of the KPG mass extinction. Many people prefer this one over the one in Walking with Dinosaurs, with many thinking this is what that documentary should have done as well. Here's my hot take: I disagree immensely. The one in Walking with Dinosaurs is, to this day, the only one of its kind. That documentary did something no future documentary could emulate, and that's having the restraint not to show the asteroid hitting the Earth. You can watch any other dinosaur documentary and probably get something similar to this film, but there is nothing like the one in Walking with Dinosaurs. Hell, even the next entry in the series couldn't resist, judging by that every episode of Walking with Beasts opens with the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. Walking with Dinosaurs gave up on spectacle for immersion, and that can't be said for this documentary. Now granted, all other forms of immersion were thrown out the window, so for this kind of documentary, this is definitely acceptable. But I'm sick and tired of hearing people compare these two scenes when they're going for two completely different vibes. One is trying to be a realistic look at what the initial impact was like from the dinosaur's perspective, while the other is trying to be a much more flashy and extravagant recreation of this disaster. If you prefer this scene over the one in Walking with Dinosaurs, your opinion is perfectly valid, but for me, it's personally not as impactful. Ironic, I know. Afterwards, we see the few remaining survivors of the extinction as John Goodman gives us our closing narration.
To a time when dinosaurs roamed America.
Holy hell, he said the thing! So that was When Dinosaurs Roamed America. It was alright. I'll give it some credit. While the things it did wrong were numerous, it also did almost just as much that was novel for the time. Fully feathered dinosaurs, big bad Dilophosaurus, and scavenging kets were just a few. When I first watched it, I honestly think I found it to be worse than it truly was, and on my second watch while writing the script, I found it to be much more enjoyable. It definitely isn't a new favorite, but if like me you haven't already checked this documentary out, I don't think it's a waste of your time. I'd give it a 7 out of 10, leaning closer to a 6 than an 8. And with that, we've come to the end of our very first review. I probably shouldn't have picked an hour-and-a-half long documentary as the first review, but I think I was able to do a good job regardless. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video. Whenever that may be. Bye-bye.